Welcome back, class. We're continuing our conversation on cognitive development where we left off during the last class. We're continuing chapter 4, looking at developing through the lifespan. So we just finished up a conversation about Piaget's stages of development and looking at Lev Vygotsky's alternative viewpoint. Now we're going to look at autism spectrum disorder. It appears in childhood by age 8 normally. It's marked by significant deficiencies in communication and social interaction, with rigidly fixated interests and repetitive behaviors. The underlying symptom source is poor brain communication among brain regions that facilitate taking others' viewpoint. We have here an ASD, an impaired theory of mind. ASD represents itself in different levels of severity, from functioning at a high level to severe disability. Some of the causes are thought to be biological factors, including genetics, also random gene mutation. Also, there could be some involvement in prenatal environment, including maternal infection and inflammation, and psychiatric drug use, as well as stress hormones. The prevalence is somewhat debatable to some extent. They may be relabeling of other childhood disorders. There are some gender differences as well, and treatment can use oxytocin as well as other behavioral interventions. Now, behavioral intervention. One of the key issues regarding people who suffer ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is their lack of being able to connect to other individuals, being able to interpret the cues, social cues in particular, that we, as people who don't suffer from ASD, are so easily capable of doing. Looking at a facial expression and understanding that the person is upset or the person is happy. So what they've been doing is trying to communicate and to train individuals who suffer from ASD and increasing and enhancing their ability to recognize facial expressions that can be matched appropriately with the context or situation. So the textbook goes into some detail about it. The graph that we see here represents a group of individuals who are non-ASD. They represent the control group. And the ASD individuals represent the individuals who have autism spectrum disorder. The blue line is the ASD control group that did not receive any particular type of training. Then we look at the ASD children that did receive what is known as FACES intervention, trying to learn how to identify which facial expression matches the context. From time 1 before training to time 2 after the training, you can see that their ability to be able to identify facial expressions with context and emotions is much improved. So now let's look at social development. Well, at birth, we do see that there is a preference for familiar faces and voices. This gradually reacts to parent attention with coos and googles. So the idea here is that the children are getting familiar and being attracted to faces that they've seen often enough, as well as voices. And they will start to react as parents interact with them with baby talk. Around 8 months, we start to see the object permanence take root. And object permanence, again, is the idea and understanding that an object in front of you, once it is taken away from you, that object still does have existence. It's just not there in front of you. Around 8 months, though, we do see fear of strangers or stranger anxiety. Stranger's anxiety, the fear of strangers that infants commonly display beginning around 8 months of age. So they are shy around them. They tend to try to crawl away or wiggle away from these people that are not part of their familiar faces and familiar voices. Around 13 months, we start to see anxiety disorders from parents peak. So the idea is that we can see that this stranger anxiety, separation anxiety can occur. It's part of normal social development to some extent. All of this may be based, in fact, in this area of attachment, a very specific area of social development. What is attachment? Well, attachment is an emotional tie to another individual, another thing. So this emotional tie represents your attachment. It's characterized by seeking closeness with this figure of attachment and separation distress when we are taken away or it is taken away from us. So we become attached to it, we want it there, we want it in our presence, and then when it's taken away or we are removed from this object of our attachment, then we get distress. Well, where does this happen? Why do we see attachment? Well, a couple of the ideas regarding the origin of attachment. We have body contact, soft, warm, touching, or arousing, secure base provision, and familiarity formed during critical periods and imprinting when it comes to animals specifically. So the notion is that what we see is that attachment makes us want to be close to have physical contact with. Psychologist Harry Harlow and Margaret Harlow raised monkeys with two artificial mothers. One a bare wire cylinder with a wooden head and an attached feeding bottle, and the other a cylinder with no bottle but covered with foam rubber and wrapped with terry cloth. The Harlow's discovery surprised many psychologists. The infants in this case preferred contact with the comfortable cloth mother even while feeding from the wire nourishing mother. The indication here is the following: that we want to have physical closeness and contact. That seems to be a major drive for us. Even though we may get nourishment from somebody, that's important. But more important to some extent is having that physical contact. This too may help aid in the development of attachment between parents or a mother in particular and child. So we do see that there are attachment differences. And attachment differences just indicate that some people may be overly attached or insecurely attached to the object of their attachment. So, in order to study this, Mary Ainsworth conducted some research. It's called the strange situation, and she was trying to understand more properly the styles of attachment that exist. We have secure attachment and insecure attachment. Insecure attachment can be broken down into two types: anxious type and avoidant type. With anxious type of insecure attachment, want acceptance but fear and looking for rejection. And the avoidant type of insecure attachment, discomfort getting close and sabotage getting closer. Now, let's talk a little bit more detail about attachment. When it comes to secure attachment, what this indicates is that you feel good about your attachment object. You feel comfortable with it, which also indicates that if you are separated from your attachment object or it becomes separated from you, you are okay with that. It does not cause some degree of distress in you. Unlike insecure attachment, where it does cause distress. So let's say you see that someone is being dropped off for the first time at a daycare center, and they begin to cry and get all upset and very agitated, and they're wailing and all this type of stuff. That may be an indication of some degree of insecure attachment, as opposed to secure attachment, where the kid may show some signs of initial anxiety, but then does not begin to cry or wail or anything of that nature. So attachment is really about how well we are attached and what type of attachment we have toward our attachment object. Now, let me give you a little bit more detail about some of the research that Mary Ainsworth did. Again, it's called the strange situation. So what would happen is a child and their parent, usually the mother, would go to a strange environment. Okay, the mother would stay with the kid for a little bit as the kid maybe starts exploring this strange environment, and then the mother gets up and leaves. That is when they're getting very interested in what the child does. Does the child show a little anxiety and get back to whatever they're doing, or do they start to cry and get concerned? The other thing they were interested in was what happens when the mother returns. Well, when the mother returns, do they scream or yell at the mother, or do they try to avoid the mother upon return? So what this experiment is trying to do is trying to ascertain the type of attachment by looking at what type of anxiety is revealed when the mother leaves the child in this strange situation, and what type of anxiety may be revealed when the mother returns. Ideally, the key thing may be this. Well, if an insecure attached child sees their mother leave, they may be concerned whether or not the mother will return or return at some uh, reasonable time. Whereas the securely attached child may have no issue with that whatsoever. They will believe quite seriously that the mother will return if needed. Temperament and attachment. Well, attachment is the process by which certain animals form strong attachments during early life. Temperament, however, is a characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. So let's look at it from this perspective. Attachment, and one key thing about attachment styles is this. It is believed that your attachment style that you indicate or illustrate or show when you are a child can also be demonstrated as the same attachment style as an adult. So if you were an insecurely attached young person, you may be an insecurely attached older person as well. Someone who's not so comfortable or confident in the attachment they have with another person. This could be a romantic partner in this instance. So you may be a little bit more anxious. In this case, fear and looking for rejection. They say something, you're more likely to say it is something that you are saying because you are rejecting me. Avoidant type of discomfort. When someone is getting really close in a relationship, a romantic relationship, and they're getting very intimate and very close when it comes to the emotional things that they're starting to share with another individual, they may try to sabotage the relationship to avoid getting closer. So this is some of the adult manifestations of your attachment style that you may have developed as a young person. Now, difference between attachment and temperament. First, when it comes to temperament, temperament is something that we appear to be born with. You may have heard the terms before, easygoing child or a sensitive child. This could be a descriptor provided even shortly after birth. They could be still somewhat of a newborn, not really able to do much or learn anything at this point. That's very complicated, like social interaction. But yet and still, one kid may be easily upset, and one kid may have a longer rope, so to speak, and not get easily upset by the environment around them. So we see that temperament seems to be something that we are born with, and temperament seems to stick around. You don't change your temperament. Now, again, as I was stating earlier, attachment styles in later relationships, we do see that attachment styles do tend to have some influence in later life. But let's look at why it is that these attachment styles may develop. All right, so attachment styles may develop for a variety of reasons. But what we'll see a little bit later is that Erik Erikson, who comes up with a wonderful model, the psychosocial stages of development, to explain how our social interactions influences our development in a variety of areas, he talks about this first stage called basic trust. And we'll go over this a little bit more later. But basic trust is a key stage of development. In this stage of development, per Erik Erikson, we can develop a sense of trust in the world or a sense of mistrust in the world. We develop that early on in life. So if in this early stage of development, looking at the psychosocial stages of development, we develop a sense of mistrust in the world, we don't trust the world that much. So the idea is that we don't have any evidence that the world is trusting or trustworthy, and therefore when our mother gets up to leave, we don't necessarily trust that she'll come back, not at a reasonable time. Now, this basic trust is built upon this foundation according to Erik Erikson. If you have a need as a young child and you cry and you cry and you cry and no one is there at a reasonable amount of time to give you relief, to comfort you, you may start to develop a sense of mistrust in the world. As opposed to a kid who cries and then almost immediately or within a reasonable amount of time, the caregiver, the parent, or the mother shows up and takes care of whatever needs they have. That child may develop a sense of trust in the world. So now we see how this may play a role in your attachment style. If you have a sense of basic trust, you're more likely to have a secure attachment style, trusting in your mother or your caregiver. If you have a sense of mistrust, then you may not be so trusting of your caregiver or your mother. And therefore, when they leave, you have some major concerns about it. Next, we talk about parenting. Well, the research out there about parenting, we've seen a lot of this over the last few years. Dual parenting positives. Well, father's love and acceptance is comparable with mother's love in predicting an offspring's health and well-being. Active dads are assuming and more caregiving. Happier relationships and fewer divorces are tied to couples' shared housework. And dual parenting tends to support children. Parent gender does not seem to affect the children's well-being. So, looking at attachment styles, I went over this a little bit already in a way. Attachment styles in later relationships. Well, sensitive, loving parent-infant relationships foster basic social trust. It provides a positive foundation for adult relationships and contribute to a lifelong attitude of trust. And again, per Eric Erickson, that sense of trust or basic trust is something that we see develop early in our life. Therefore, it may help to explain where these forms of insecure attachment may come from, the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment described earlier. So this idea of basic trust, according to Eric Erickson again, is a sense that the world is predictable and trustworthy, said to be formed during infancy by appropriate experiences with responsive caregivers. Responsive caregivers are the ones who show up in a reasonable amount of time when the kid is indicating that they need some assistance by crying. The only real way they have to communicate early in life. We do see that deprivation of attachment can be very problematic as well. Children who experience an enduring abuse do not always thrive. Outcomes of adopted Romanian orphans really point to this, and other international research as well. So what it comes down to, if we go to parts of the world where they are war-torn, where there are great trials and tribulations of government oppressiveness, where people can be taken up off the streets and just disappear, where there are fighting going on between factions within the city. When this is your environment, your world in which you are growing up with, and you wind up being an orphan, such as we saw during certain times in the world, in Romania, then we can see sort of like a real life type of experiment sort of results where we can have these whole generations of kids that are and have experienced these types of deprivation and attachment. And it may cause some issues with their future development and their ability to control their emotionality. So abused children's brains may contribute to heightened reactivity. They have a stronger startle response as infants, heightened reactions to later stress and stress-related disease. Okay, so we do see in these instances where infants have grown up in these environments, there is going to be an influence later in life. Now, this is not to say that this is the outcome of everyone who goes through these type of situations. Some abused children are resilient. They can withstand and do withstand the trauma and become well-adjusted adults. And they develop a sort of mental toughness. This idea of resilience you may come across, if you haven't already before, you will come across it in the future, I'm sure. Resilience is basically developing a tough skin, a certain type of mental toughness. Let me give you a scenario here. Let's say we have two 25-year-old kids. Well, they're basically adults now. Two 25-year-old young adults. And they were born on the same day, but they were born in totally different environments. We have 25-year-old Alpha. We just call them Alpha for lack of a better name. So we have Alpha, okay, and then we have Beta. Alpha grew up in a very luxurious environment. Everything they ever wanted, they got, and all this type of stuff. And then Beta grew up in a very tough environment. There'd be so often they'd make progress, they get knocked down, so to speak, and they have to go do it again. So they've had many stops and starts in their life. Now, both of these individuals, Alpha and Bravo, they now are 25 years old, and a very, very traumatic event happens to them. A life-altering event happens to both of them, the same type of event. Well, Alpha has never experienced trauma, never been beaten down before to get back up. Beta has. Beta has developed over their entire life a sense of resilience. And that's what it comes down to. Resilience gives you practice in the sense of being tough. Okay, some people may have it sort of naturally occurring, where they are more naturally more resilient, whatever those factors lead to resiliency, and allows them to withstand certain types of trauma. Now, parenting styles. We all have parents or someone that were caregivers to us. Even if you were an orphan and grew up in an orphanage, there was someone there that provided some sort of caregiving role. It may not have been great, but there was someone there. Parenting styles is another key influence on our social development. Who we are to some degree is going to be explained by how we were parented as we were growing up during our formative years. So there are a few parenting styles we want to go over real quickly. We have the parenting style called the authoritarian. Authoritarian. They tend to be coercive. They're the type of parent that says, while you're under my roof, while I'm paying the bills, you will do as I tell you to. Do as I say, not as I do. These are the ones who establish the rules, and God forbid if you break those rules. They tend to be seen as somewhat coercive. They're trying to coerce the children to behave according to their strict protocols and their strict rules. However, authoritarian parents tend to develop children that have fewer social skills and lower self-esteem and overreacts when mistakes are made. So their social skills are somewhat limited. They're not seeing themselves necessarily as a person of worth, and when mistakes are made, they may tend to overreact. That is what we tend to see, according to the research, with authoritarian parents. Then we have the permissive parent or parenting style. These individuals are unrestraining. There are no real rules. They simply let the kid do whatever they want. They stay up as late as they want. They stay out as long as they want. Wherever they want to go, they go. All this type of stuff. Well, the permissive style parenting, this unrestraining style, usually results in children or kids that are more aggressive and immature. More aggressive, they are used to getting their way all the time. However, when they get out into the quote real world, the real world does not work that way. So when they show up late for the fifth time or the third time, most likely the third time at their new job, they're simply fired. For them, they don't understand. They've never had been treated this way. The rules always were somewhat flexible for them. So they tend to be very immature because they've not had any guiding hand or any structure that they had to follow. It really does not prepare them well for the life of work out in the real world. Then we have the negligent parenting style. These parents are just uninvolved. They really have no interest in their child, and they really don't interact with them on a regular basis. These uninvolved parents usually produce children that are poor academically and have poor social outcomes. Now we have finally the authoritative style of parent. This is usually considered to be the best parenting style. Authoritative. This is not to say they do not present rules, because there are plenty of rules with authoritative parents. But the rules are not like written in stone. There is usually some room for negotiation with the authoritative parent, unlike the authoritarian. The authoritative parents are seen as confrontive. They confront things directly. They usually may bring the child in and involved here. They usually may bring the child and get them involved in planning and coming up and negotiating with what the rules and strictures are going to be. So they provide the rules with you or with the child, and then if you do not meet those criteria or those rules, then the punishments are meted out appropriately. But they are listening, and this is one thing that authoritarian parents do not normally do. The authoritative parents listen and they communicate to children in this instance. They normally, the authoritative style will produce children with the highest level of self-esteem, the highest level of self-reliance and self-regulation, that's self-control, as well as social confidence, getting along with people, not being so judgmental, and those types of things. So here we see these parenting styles, how we are raised, the strong nurture part of the nature nurture. The nurture part does play a significant role in having an influence on our life long term. So, culture and child raising. Well, obviously, all child raising advice reflects the advice giver's value, how you were raised. That's going to be a key factor. In many ways, how you were raised as a child will illustrate in some manner and be related to in some manner how you raise your children. Cultural values vary across time and place too. A long time ago, there was more acceptance for corporal punishment for children, where children would be physically spanked or something of that nature. Here we've seen as time has moved on, people have moved further and further away from there. So children thrive under various child raising systems. So no one system is particularly better than the other, but children do find a way to thrive and become adults successfully normally. In North America, upper class, British, Asian, African cultures, there are many different ways and many different types of child raising systems. Now, physical development when it comes to adolescence. Now, adolescence is an interesting time. Adolescence is more of a recent invention in a way. A long time ago, we're talking centuries ago, children, young people, were seen just as miniature adults. It would not be unusual for someone who, a couple of hundred years ago, someone who was 10 years old to be getting ready to go out and get some sort of job, or someone, a female who's 14 years old, to be ready to be sent off to be married. So what we see as times became more, quote, civilized, or became more technologically capable, and we had more industry and all this type of stuff, things started to change somewhat. And so what happened is that a bubble was put around childhood, a protective bubble, so to speak. So this protective bubble was done so that children had few expectations on them, and they were allowed to be children, allowed to get an education, allowed to find their way, to figure out what they wanted to do with their life and things of that nature. So adolescence is a transition period from childhood to adult. And adolescence can get, it's sort of a flexible time frame. It can be someone who is out of their teenage years still could be considered an adolescent. So it's about transitioning from childhood to being someone who's considered an adult. That's what this period is. From puberty to independence. That's how we can describe adolescence in one way to sort of put a time frame on it. Once you've gone through puberty, you're now capable of taking part in reproduction. Okay? That's what puberty is. All right? And so now, once puberty has engaged itself, you are now adolescent, and then you're waiting for you to be an independent individual. That will be a sign of you becoming an adult. Now, it has been described, this period of adolescence has been described as a time of storm and stress, where we have careless vitality or something in between. So we say there's a lot of stuff going on during adolescence. Now, puberty, as I was saying earlier, is a period of sexual maturation, okay, during which a person becomes capable of reproducing. The timing of puberty. The sequence of physical changes is more predictable than its timing. So we know what the sequence of events are going to be. When it starts, well, that's going to be a little bit up for depending upon the individual. And there are some gender differences, however. So when it comes to gender differences, let me back up here. When it comes to gender differences, we know that normally speaking, females will begin their puberty sooner than males will. So what will happen is this: adolescent boy and adolescent girl, or kids, two kids, a boy kid and a girl kid, are basically around the same size. And then all of a sudden, one day, the girl kid starts puberty. And what will happen is she will start to grow and develop physically. Okay? And what we'll see next is those same age kids will now be different in sizes or heights. So this is normally when the female becomes taller on average than their male counterpart of the same age, simply because the females have gone through puberty first. It will take some time, but once the males start their puberty, it will tend to last a little bit longer and allow them to catch up with and normally surpass the females in height once puberty has finalized itself. Now, let's look at the teenage brain. Brain cells increase their connections until puberty. So we see connections are being made all over the place. Then we see the selective pruning of unused neurons and connections begins. Myelin continues to develop, the myelin sheaths that we've talked about previously. Hormonal surge and lagging limbic system development contribute to impulsiveness, risky behaviors, and emotional storms. So this is what's happening in the teenage brain. So we referred to earlier that the frontal lobe is not fully formed yet in the teenage brain. That's the part of the brain that sort of controls or inhibits risky behavior and things of that nature. So at the same time, in the teenage body, hormones are surging. And what this all leads to will contribute to impulsiveness and risky behaviors. And there's no frontal lobe inhibitor circuits to stop that behavior from occurring. That's why we have the following. The APA, the American Psychological Association, which we referred to in the first chapter, and the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2004, an argument and ruling against the death penalty for 16 and 17-year-olds. In 2012, a ruling against sentencing juveniles to life without parole. Why? Well, it's an understanding based on the research and psychological knowledge that to a large extent, since the brains have not fully developed because of the hormone releasing and systems going on in the teenage body, they're more prone to risky behaviors and to acting things out. Therefore, these rulings from the court system is cutting them a little bit of slack. Now, look at impulse control, lax reward seeking. So we see here a graph that indicates impulse control, your ability to stop things from happening because there may be stupid ideas that you're thinking about doing are very risky. And then we have sensation seeking. And so what we see here at the age of 16, 17, 18, 19, we see a lot of sensation seeking. But we see a corresponding low levels of impulse control. Therefore, they're more likely and capable of doing riskier behaviors. It's not until getting close to our 20th birthday that we start to see impulse control overtake our sensation-seeking behaviors. So, looking further at cognitive development, let's look at reasoning power. Formal operations change adolescent thinking, according to Piaget. So we have abstract, hypothetical reasoning can occur now. We have consequences deductions. If I do something, these are the possible consequences to my actions. We have inconsistency and hypocrisy detection. So here, you can see when someone's making some sort of argument, the inconsistencies in their argument, and you can also realize when someone is being a hypocrite. So this is part of our developing our reasoning power, our ability to reason and to tease apart uh, arguments that people may present to us and understand what the truth may be from our perspective. Now, part of this also goes down to morality, developing morality. Piaget and Kohlberg did some thinking on this particular area. Moral reasoning guides our moral actions. Moral people think and act morally. Morality is influenced by conscious and unconscious thinking. Basically, what it comes down to is this: we want to do the right thing. What is right, what is fair, what is just. This all comes into play when we're talking about morality. The critical tasks for this: discerning right from wrong, developing what people refer to as character, somebody who has values that they stand for, someone who is true to their word, things of that nature, and being able to see things from other people's perspectives, to empathize for other individuals, to see somebody who is suffering because they are different from you. You may not agree with everything that person does or believes in, but they're different from you, and you see they're being discriminated against or being treated unjustly or harshly, and you still, though, can empathize with them and maybe even fight for their rights or for them to be treated more properly or in a more civil manner. So, moral reasoning. So, how they did some research in this particular area, they would pose moral dilemmas to children to develop a hierarchy of formal reasoning. Three invariant levels of moral thinking was what Kohlberg came up with. We have pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional moral thought. And we'll go over those in a brief second. There are going to be some cultural limitations of post-conventional stage noted by critics. So the idea is that not all are fully accepting of these levels of moral thinking. So they're not in total agreement with everyone's saying, yes, this is what it is. But these are some of the thoughts that have gone into understanding how our morality develops as we age. Moral intuition theorized morality is rooted in moral intuitions. Although the default system is used, it may be manually overridden, like dual processing that we talked about earlier. Then we look at moral action. Depends on social influences and doing the right thing. It relies on the ability to delay impulses and immediate gratification. So we see there's a lot of things involved in this issue of morality. But let's look a little bit more closely at moral levels of thinking per Kohlberg. So, in Kohlberg's levels of moral thinking, we have pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. The pre-conventional usually happens before you're age 9. The focus there is self-interest. Morality is based on self-interest. We obey rules to avoid punishment and gain concrete rewards. So the person is showing morality, quote, morality is being demonstrated because they're just trying to avoid being punished and gain rewards. So the example here is, if you save your loved one, you'll be a hero. So you'll be in the newspaper, your picture be there, you're a hero. That's why. Nothing higher than that, nothing more highfalutin than that, just I'm a hero now. That's a reward. Then we have conventional morality. This occurs during early adolescence. Uphold laws and rules to gain social approval and maintain social order. Here, it can be demonstrated in such a thing as, well, that's not the way the game is played. That's not the rules. So someone who's all about the rules, and that provides structure. They're trying to avoid chaos. That's the driving factor and driving force behind that type of conventional morality. The example here, if you steal the medicine, everyone will think you're a criminal. Okay? So this is saying it's about making sure that there's social order. Okay? It also has a little bit of a hint, too, that they'll think you're a criminal. That's sort of like a reward not to be thought of as a criminal as well. Then we have post-conventional morality. This occurs in mid and late adolescence into adulthood or beyond. So here, the focus is actions reflect belief in basic rights and is self-defined ethical principles. People have a right to live would be an example. People have a right to be free. People have a right to go to work and not to be discriminated against. People have these rights. Now, it should be noted when we look at post-conventional morality, sometimes your ethical principles, your self-defined ethical principles, may go against the actual laws of the land. In that case, you may ethically break the law. You think the law is unjust, you then can ethically break the law based on your principles. And a lot of people did this. There are lots of laws during the 50s and 60s about discrimination, Jim Crow laws, all these laws, in which a lot of normally law-abiding citizens broke those laws because from their self-defined ethical standards and ethical principles, the laws were seen as unjust. We'll stop there for now.